So we'll now start with the presentation on the key findings of the report. The way we have thought about this section is I'll present the findings for next about 20-25 minutes, where we will highlight what were the key inputs and feedbacks that we received from the independent directors and certain KMPs that we had interviewed. In this presentation, while we'll focus on the findings, the idea is that in the subsequent two technical sessions that we are going to hold, the panel conversations, we will deliberate more in terms of the best practices, solutions, and what needs to be done to resolve some of the challenges that we will highlight in the presentation. A copy of this report is available at the registration desk. Feel free to take your copies. With that, I will get into the findings. We haven't kept a Q&A after this session. Q&A we will do at end of each panel conversation. So like I mentioned, the genesis of this entire study was when we started looking at, we were doing an internal project where we wanted to understand that what are the key concerns that are being raised on the topic of internal control, especially after internal IFC came into being. And both the auditors, the statutory auditors and the directors in their director statement have to make declaration on the health of internal control, and if there are any challenges that needs to be highlighted. So we looked at about 150 annual reports for 2 consecutive years, basically 300 annual reports, covering companies across industries and across size, so large cap, mid cap, and small cap. We also took in the sample a set of annual reports from companies where there were any allegations of fraud, financial irregularity, any adverse event like auditor, director, unexplained auditor, director resignation. So that was the population which we took for the study. And as you can see, what we found was that in very, very few annual reports, there was any disclosure on adverse disclosure on health of internal control. Only 1.7% of the annual report of companies where there were no known adverse event, there was any disclosure, and these were also only in small companies. No adverse disclosure in any of the large or mid-cap companies. Even where there were issues which were highlighted immediately in the next year, or there were existing issues on matters of corporate governance, financial irregularity, etc. Only 19% of the annual report, there was a disclosure by the auditors on internal control, and then if we look at the director's report, in 100% of the annual reports were clean, no adverse comment, which then made us think that why it is like this. We did some comparison with Sarbanes-Oxley Act as well, and there the disclosure levels were far higher. For smaller companies, the disclosures were as high as 30%. So that then made us think that why it is like this, and we thought that this requires a deeper study. So the study that we did in partnership with CIA and NFCG, like I mentioned, we interviewed close to 100 independent directors and some KMPs. KMPs we interviewed to get the management perspective, that while the study has been focused largely from an independent director's perspective, but also what does a KMP expect from the independent director? What are the challenges that he or she face in the advice guidance that they receive from independent directors? So the report has been now put in 3 sections. First one is roles, responsibility, and liability of independent director. Here we take a macro view of the overall environment, the regulatory environment, the statutory environment, the board practices in which the independent directors operate. The second part, which is dealing with the specific topic of the disclosure, was on the health of internal controls. The key question that we asked was that is the health of internal control as good as reflected in the annual report? So that was the key question that we asked. And what are the challenges that the independent directors face in making the disclosure on internal control? And the third section was on the role of auditors. Auditors being a key agent for the audit committee, board, independent directors in discharging their responsibility. So the third section was on the role of auditors. Are the auditors able to provide the service or the assurance that the board needs to be able to discharge their responsibility, and what kind of changes that they believe are needed for the auditors to discharge their responsibility better? That was the crux of this section. So that's how the report has been structured. I'll take you through the key findings in each of these three sections. So the first major issue which emerged, and Vikas also spoke about it in his address, is that 70% of the independent directors believe that the legal action which has been taken, or the threat of legal action which is there, is extreme. They believe that it is not fair. It is not in line with the practical roles and responsibilities that an independent director really discharges. So because of that, we heard, and that is there in statistics as well, that the number of director resignations has gone up drastically. When we were doing the study, the statistic from there was that the resignations have doubled. While there are requirements that the independent directors should disclose that why they are resigning, the reasons which typically get mentioned are personal reasons, preoccupation with other activities. So one doesn't really know that if there is anything wrong happening in the company because of which these resignations are, or directors are just resigning because of the reasons stated. Now, this is not a good trend because because of the threat of legal action, even if there is some whiff of something wrong, a lot of times we hear the first reaction of the directors, independent directors, is to resign. Now, it is important that we give them the necessary safeguard and the comfort so that they remain in the company and resolve and solve any issues which are there, including corporate governance issues, rather than taking the step of resignation. Because of this, the linked issue is that directors are very hesitant in taking, or professionals are very hesitant in taking independent director position. We repeatedly heard from various people that we interviewed that a lot of them have resigned from board positions where they were not comfortable, or where they really did not know the promoters well. And then they said that we are very hesitant to take a new board position. They said we take board position only in companies with a very strong track record of good corporate governance, or where we have a personal comfort with the promoter, where we believe that the promoter is genuine and he or she will hold good corporate governance ethical standard. Now, that poses an issue, is that if there is already a comfort or there is a social connection with the promoter, even if the person is technically independent, does the person really remain independent from a social connection point of view? And that's the point which really emerged, that if that is the basis of taking the position, does it really compromise on the independence of the independent director? We also heard as a practice that instead of taking a formal board position as an independent director, a lot of professionals today prefer taking an advisory role. There is this concept of advisory board which is emerging. Now, one needs to do more study and discussion that what does it mean for the corporate governance for the company when there are two centers. One is a formal board, and then there is an advisory board for running the company, for giving the strategic direction of the company, and what might be the dynamics between these two governing body for the organization. So these are some of the topics that got raised in this part of the study. As I mentioned, we will deliberate more in the panel discussion on these topics, including what needs to be done from a regulatory perspective, from a decriminalization perspective, how do we ensure independence of the director, what are good board practices. Some of these topics is are what we will cover as we move forward. Then the next question was on the safeguards that are available for the independent directors. While there are onerous responsibilities which the law has put on them, and when I say law, it is the Companies Act, and then several other acts where directors have responsibility, be it the labor laws, environmental laws. A lot of discussion happened on Prevention of Money Laundering Act, PMLA, where there are a lot of provisions where the directors can be held liable, criminally liable. So we asked whether you believe that there are adequate safeguards, and 81% of the independent directors said that these safeguards are not adequate. While there are certain safeguards, there is a carve-out for independent directors which calls out that under what circumstances they can be held liable and when they may not be held liable. Similar carve-out is not there in other laws. There is a need that we bring some level of equality among the various laws on this particular topic. MCA also issued a circular a couple of years back where it had advised that any investigating agency should not launch or case or charge sheet an independent director unless there is some prima facie evidence of wrongdoing. We heard that while this is there, but in practice it is not being implemented, and charge sheets do get filed in spite of that safeguard and the circular which is there under the Companies Act. And hence there is a need to work back with the regulators, work back with the investigating agencies so that they are sensitized about these circulars, they are sensitized under what circumstances a case or a charge sheet should be launched. Almost to say that should there be a SOP, standard, one of the independent director that we had interviewed suggested that there should be some kind of a standard operating procedure or an interministerial committee kind of a setup which authorizes any such action under independent director. Decriminalization is another topic. While a lot of sections have been decriminalized, the liabilities related to independent directors and directors as a whole continue to have imprisonment implications. So those were some of the topics and points that got covered in this particular section. Then we spoke about that while under the Companies Act, there is a definition of what are the various roles, responsibilities of the board of the independent directors or various committees, subcommittees of the board. But is it really so well defined from a practical point of view? When you see these charters, whatever is there in the law, that gets replicated and that becomes the role responsibility. But is the role responsibility as defined under the law versus what the independent directors see for themselves, their role and responsibility, is it in sync? So we heard that it is not in sync. The role responsibility as defined under the law is very legalistic. Independent directors are responsible to ensure, or the directors are responsible to ensure that the company has adopted right accounting standard, has strong policy and procedures related to accounting. They have implemented strong control framework. They have implemented, right, which is very operational, which is very hands-on kind of responsibility as defined, very legalistic, accounting, compliance oriented. However, in practice, they see their role as more advisory, more strategic, more oversight, more giving directional input and advice to the company and the management. So they believed that this is actually not in sync, what is required as per the law and what they see as their responsibility in practice. The other part is that the responsibilities are defined as a collective of the board and largely of the board and maybe also at a committee level. We heard from a lot of independent directors, especially independent directors who come from non-finance background. They said that they find it very difficult to really discharge their responsibility. Given all the accounting standards have become extremely complex, the control environment is complex, there is a huge amount of technology which is needed. People from marketing background, technical production background, they felt that they feel handicapped in actually being able to discharge their responsibility, and hence end up trusting the finance person in the board or in the committee to really look at these matters, and not unfortunately are able to add the value. And hence, but because the accountability is at an overall level, if something goes wrong, everybody will get implicated. So hence the suggestion was that can accountabilities be defined at more individual level, so that if somebody has expertise in a particular area, he or she can be held responsible for that. How does the information flow from a committee to the board? A lot of deliberations happen at a committee level, let's say audit committee level. What should then flow to the board? Where does the responsibility remain of the committee or the audit committee, and where the responsibility is there for the entire board, which may not have participated in the deliberations at a committee level? So these were the points. We also asked that while the expectations are increasing from the independent directors, the liabilities are onerous. What is the increase in time that you spend on your board-related matters, both in the formal board meetings and outside the board meeting? And we heard that there is only a moderate increase. So while the responsibilities are increasing, but the directors are actually not spending really significant time in the companies where they are board members. Various reasons were stated around that, but that again is a point to be discussed, that how do really independent directors spend the time that is needed to discharge the responsibility that has been assigned to them. There are limits on number of board positions that a person can take, whether those limits are adequate, whether it should be reduced. Those are the points that need further deliberation. Health of internal controls, 89% said that the health of internal control is not as good as reported in the annual report. Some of the reasons stated was that the board agenda is cluttered with a lot of other items. There isn't too much time spent on discussing internal controls, internal audit, internal financial control. There is a casual approach to some of these topics. One of the ID mentioned, possibly jokingly, we spend 39 seconds on discussing internal financial control, right? So hopefully it was just in a jovial manner. But that is what is there. As auditors, we also believe that there is a need to give more focus on this topic. There needs to be more deliberation on this particular topic. Key risks are not covered. The issues on corporate governance happen because of tone at top, the culture in the organization, right? Related party transaction, matters which require management judgment. Sometimes we find these risks are not there in the internal audit plan. These risks are actually not covered as part of IFC, internal financial control. So we asked, who does that? Typically, the internal auditor is not looking at these areas. So the question is, who is really looking at these areas, which really are the root cause for a lot of the governance failures that we see in the company? Some of the other reasons stated were that the control framework needs to be strengthened. There needs to be better linkage between the risk assessment and the audit plan. The independence of auditors, that needs further discussion, deliberation. So those were some of the reasons stated that why disclosure levels are low. Just a point I want to add is that while we are highlighting the majority view in this presentation, but in the report we have also given due weightage to the minority view. Not that everybody said that. In the presentation today, again, I'm focusing on majority view, but importantly that we also understand the minority view, as was stated, because there were people who actually said that the internal control is possibly as good as stated, for the reason that there is a far more focus on internal control. Issues which are there get addressed before they are in the course of the year, the issues get addressed, and hence there is no need to actually report in the annual report. The resource availability for independent directors again was called out a challenge. Though the law empowers them a lot, as per the law, they have the full right to get the resources that they need. However, 60% of the directors said that they do not have the resources, adequate resources to confirm the health of internal controls. These resources can be in terms of their own expertise, like I said, especially from the directors with non-finance background, the support that they receive from management, the sessions or the knowledge that the management shares with them about the company, the industry, the environment in which they are operating. Lack of information was called out as a big challenge. There was a lot of discussion around information asymmetry between the independent directors, the whole-time directors, and the KMP, the time spent on internal controls. So those were some of the challenges that were called out. This chart basically highlights the challenges that they had called out. As you can see, the time spent on internal control was called out as the major issue. Lack of relevant information was called out, another one. An important topic, which also we will cover in the panel discussion, is that while one hand we say we need more information, but how much information is the right balance? Because if there is a lot of information overload, the liability also will go up for the independent directors, because more information is there, something goes wrong, then again one cannot say that I was not aware. So what is the right balance of the information? How the information needs to be shared are again points which need to be further discussed and deliberated. Ease of raising dissent. Largely, people said that it is not difficult to raise a dissent if one has that dissent. Important is that in a board, the board decorum, the collaboration is maintained. A lot of issues get thrashed out outside the board meeting, and hence dissents are often not required to be raised in the board meeting. But it is very important from a safeguard point of view that where dissents need to be recorded, they do get recorded. We got a lot of best practices from the KMPs and from the independent directors, but there is a need to possibly institutionalize or issue some guidelines on what are the good board practices on some of these matters, so that while dissents can be raised where needed in a manner that it is conducive to the overall functioning of the board, and also the independent directors are able to safeguard themselves. The role of the chairman is very important. He or she acts as a catalyst for the entire board and also for the relationship with the management. So as if there is a strong chairman, we heard that the board functioning becomes very smooth. In a company which might be driven by a very strong promoter or a shareholder, there were challenges which were called out in some cases, and there the chairman needs to play the right balancing. Last section was on the role of auditors. So 52% of the independent directors believe that the auditors don't provide adequate input, and there is a need to improve the way they discharge their role. The definition of auditor here is both statutory auditor and internal auditor. We gave more focus on the internal audit in our study, for the reason that while there is a lot of codification in terms of what are the role, responsibilities, etc. of the statutory auditor, there isn't much on the role of internal auditor. Under the Companies Act, while the position of internal auditor has been formalized, most of the companies, public companies, are required to have internal auditor. But what is their role, responsibility, liability, etc. of an internal auditor, that has not been defined. The onus of internal audit still remains on the audit committee. They can ask the internal auditor to help in the way they want, but internal auditor per se has not been defined, given any specific responsibility, etc. So the issues that were raised is internal audit focuses on continue to focuses on accounting matter, transactional matters. We have seen, and what we heard also was that typically the areas which have been traditionally being covered across the years, those areas keep on getting repeated, but the newer risks which are emerging, say in the technology side, the cyber side, data privacy, those often do not get missed out. Some of the higher level risk, like of code of conduct, tone at top, those do not get covered in any meaningful way. Fraud-related matters need more attention as part of the internal control frame. The auditing practices need to be enhanced. We heard that a lot of auditing still is very manual, while technology has come in across businesses. The tech enablement of audit still needs to get more focus. Use of data analytics needs to get far more focus, and these were the points that got discussed around the internal audit. We will further deliberate on the best practices. We have a strong panel which will share their views on how do we strengthen the role of the auditors and the internal. Last topic, very briefly on the risk management. When we were doing this study, this was not so formalized, but now SEBI has come out with the requirement on enterprise risk management for the top 1,000 companies. However, there is a need now while a lot of companies have designed their control framework, there is a need to now implement it on ground. There is a need to define the roles responsibility between the risk management committee and the audit committee, so that once the key risks are identified as per the risk management program, how does it flow into the audit plan so that those risks get adequate coverage? That needs to be worked on, and hence it needs collaboration between the risk management and the audit committee. Another point which was mentioned was that when the information comes to the board for decision making, a risk perspective is not given, possibly in terms of sensitivity analysis, possibly in terms of what can go wrong in what is being proposed. That risk perspective also needs to be shared with the board. Today we heard that it is possibly more of a straitjacket, single view kind of. The diversity of board also then becomes important, so that multiple views can come in, so that a risk perspective, risk view can be built into the decision making that the board. So these were some of the key findings. We will take a short break for now for about 15-20 minutes, and after that we will start with the panel. So thanks for your time, and look forward to continuing this.